There's one quick and easy way to determine if a certain investment is scam or legit. All one has to do is to check how investors can profit from their investment. In investment scams, investors can profit only from new investors. In legit investments, investors can profit from the investment itself. The best known examples of investment scams are Ponzi and pyramid schemes. After joining these schemes, the only possible way for investors to profit is from funds contributed by new investors. Without new investors, old investors are left only with scam membership, which in itself is useless, and it serves only to lure new investors into the scheme. Let's now check legitimate investments. The example of those are stocks, fiat currencies, and bonds. In order to better understand the nature of Bitcoin, we will now go ahead and explain how these investments provide profit to the investors. Let's start with stocks. When stocks circulate and change hands in the market, they function the same as Ponzi or pyramid schemes. This is because in market circulation, profit for old investors is always provided by new investors. However, unlike in the case of Ponzi or pyramid schemes, stock investors can actually profit from the company that issued the stock. This profit comes from company's earnings, in the form of dividend. Alternatively, it comes from company's equity, as a liquidation value, if the company gets liquidated and stocks are withdrawn from circulation. So, in stocks, investors can profit from the investment itself, and not only from new investors. That is why stocks are legit investments. In the case of fiat currencies, profit to the investors is provided by the borrowers. Namely, borrowers are the people that were granted bank loans. With loans, they put new currency units into circulation and received goods and services from the investors in these units. Given that borrowers have the liability to repay their loans, the banks force them to withdraw currency units from circulation. They do that withdrawal by trading their goods and services to investors, and then by repaying their loans. The goods and services that the investors received are therefore the profit that fiat currencies themselves provide to the investors. Now, what if borrowers default on their loans, and thus, fail to provide said profit? Well, then the banks themselves will provide the profit. This profit will come in the form of a collateral that the bank seized from the borrowers. Namely, the banks are obligated to sell seized collateral to investors in fiat currencies, because currency units issued with loans are the liability of the banks. Meaning, the banks are obligated to withdraw these units from circulation in order to liquidate the issued loans. So, this is an alternative way how fiat currencies themselves provide profit for the investors. That is why they are also legit investments. Finally, the last example of legit investments are bonds. In bonds, the profit for the investors is provided by the corporation that issued the bond. This profit is paid in the form of bonds face value at the bond maturity date. As we can see, in all these instances, no new investors are needed in order for old investors to profit. This is because the investment itself, that is, the issuer of an investment instrument, provides profit to the investors. And this is essentially the reason why investment instruments exist in the first place. If the issuer of an instrument collected someone else's funds by issuing the instrument, then obviously, the issuer has the liability to return the equivalent of these funds at some future time. No one but scammers can just print instruments out of thin air, use these instruments to collect valuable possessions or services from people, and then vanish, leaving people with only worthless papers or records. That is why in all legitimate investments, the issuer of an instrument is obligated to provide profit to the investors. And this finally brings us to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an investment instrument, received by Bitcoin investors. It circulates and changes hands in the markets the same as any market instrument. But here comes the crucial question. Can Bitcoin investors profit from the Bitcoin itself? To put it differently, is the issuer of Bitcoin obligated to provide profit to Bitcoin investors at some future time? Well, unfortunately, it is not. Moreover, this is impossible in principle. Because Bitcoin is issued by a computer program. Computer programs are just sequences of instructions that a computer can follow. They are not legal entities that have the obligation to pay you something. So essentially, once investors have invested in Bitcoin, Bitcoin circulates in an infinite circulation path in the markets. And the only possible way for investors to profit is from funds contributed by new investors. That means that Bitcoin is an investment scam. It belongs to the category of Ponzi and pyramid schemes. The only difference between these schemes and Bitcoin is that membership in Bitcoin is written digitally, stored in a global ledger, and listed on the markets. Also, Bitcoin membership is tagged with many fancy names, such as asset, digital gold, token, currency, money, commodity, etc. But these are just words. It's just semantics. Semantics cannot change the fact that profits to earlier investors can only come from funds of more recent investors. And this is a textbook definition of an investment scam. Empirically, there are no exceptions to the rule that all investment scams ultimately collapse. Bitcoin will meet the same fate. It's just a matter of time.